Environmental storytelling creates the preconditions for an immersive narrative experience in at least one of four ways. Spatial stories can evoke pre-existing narrative associations. They can provide a staging ground where narrative events are enacted. They may embed narrative information with their mise en scene, or they provide resources for emergent narratives. Narratives allow the exploration of, or speculation about, what would or could have happened under even slightly different conditions. Now, keeping these two quotes in mind, it is arguable that the medium which can propel a narrative forward the easiest is a video game. Video games are the one form of fiction that allow the consumer to experience events with slightly different conditions whenever they want. Video games provide a stage and ground where narrative events are enacted. They also provide the resources needed for a narrative to emerge. What makes video games so special, you may ask? Well, while playing a video game, the player ideally has complete control of what their character is doing at all times. Do you move forward, backwards, side to side? Are you jumping around destroying everything? Do you take the time to explore your surroundings? Video games allow players to create their own narrative by allowing them to decide how they choose to act. While cutscenes may be the primary way to tell a game's story, and are the most common way for a game to give context to the gameplay, games can propel a narrative forward in multiple different ways aside from this. In our sample game, Dark Souls, nearly the entire story of the game is given to the player in a cutscene at the beginning of a playthrough. You are the chosen undead, a being that is cursed to be reborn at the nearest bonfire, more on those later, upon dying, and you need to ring these two bells in order to find out what your destiny is. Is this the narrative of the game, though? How do you feel playing Dark Souls? Well, the narrative is taken further through the gameplay. The player is thrown to the wolves of Lordran, which is the game's world, and they're free to figure out as much or as little about the world as they wish. Players are free to explore all corners, and eventually it becomes clear that while ringing these bells may be the primary objective, the narrative is something else entirely. This isn't only about ringing a couple of bells, it is about trying to find your place in a world in which you, as well as everyone like you, are set up to fail. Of course, you can't talk about the gameplay of Dark Souls without mentioning the difficulty. Dark Souls is fun because it's hard. Oh, people like Dark Souls because it's the hardest game ever. Dark Souls is punishing. Like, make a single mistake and pay for it with your life kind of punishing. Every enemy you encounter will have the ability to kill you if you get careless. You'll see hundreds of other undead along the journey. People who used to be just like you. But they lost sight of their path and they went hollow. What is going hollow? Well, basically it's kind of like losing any sort of sentience that you have, and what's left is this insane, aggressive, zombie-like version of what your body now is and who you used to be. How do you prevent going hollow? Well, it's simple. You can't. Everyone in Dark Souls will eventually go hollow. But you prolong it by pursuing your goals and finding a purpose in your world. The people who went hollow are the ones who gave in. They lost sight of their goals. They gave in to the darkness and gave up. This also doubles as a nice symbol for players who get frustrated and quit playing the game before they finish. This is your future if you don't find the will to keep going. The game's bosses are also used to help show just how insurmountable the odds may seem at first. Nearly all of them tower over the player, and are able to kill you in just a few hits. These giants stand in your way, and it's up to you, this insignificant undead being, to not only stand up to these bosses, but to slay them. Back to the bonfires for a minute. These are what are used as the game's checkpoints. Fire is what powers life as we know it in the Dark Souls universe, and the game's main healing tool, the Estus Flask, is filled with fire that the player consumes. This is another use of symbolism, because just as your character needs to find the fire in order to progress, the player will be tested, and likewise will need to find their inner flame to progress through parts of the game which seem utterly impossible. You are going to die. You will die a lot, but that's okay, because you're meant to. All that matters is that you keep coming back, and that you accomplish your goals. The gameplay at Dark Souls helps to propel its narrative forward, whether this is through the crippling difficulty, common enemies, the boss fights, or even in the way that you heal yourself. Each of these things help to push the narrative further, as each of them, in their own unique way, add to the feeling that you can succeed against all odds. Another way video games are able to propel a narrative forward is through environmental storytelling. The levels of Dark Souls each find a way to tell their own tale, almost like they were their own characters inside of this narrative. Firelink Shrine is the central hub of the game, where you meet other friendly undead like yourself. Note that I mean friendly in the broadest sense here. A number of these friendly undead are despicable, but they don't immediately try to kill the player, so you have to kind of take what you can get. Firelink Shrine is accompanied by this welcoming, yet somehow somber background music, one of the only non-boss fight areas in the game that plays music at all. There's a sense of comfort that the player has when they are in Firelink Shrine. Even though you know of the great dangers that lie ahead, you're safe here. Anor Londo is this grand palace, home of the gods themselves. There are numerous guards set up across the palace, and the sun shines brighter on Anor Londo than it does anywhere else in all of Lordran. This place is prime real estate, and it's fitting that the beings in charge in this world would choose to make this their home. On the flip side, there are the New Londo ruins. The New Londo ruins are the remains of what was once a great city, but has since been destroyed by a flood. Still partially flooded, the ruins are haunted by the spirits of those killed in the catastrophe. Fittingly, the player is unable to attack these spirits, since they're ghosts, and thus can be easily overwhelmed if they go to New Londo before they are supposed to. The levels tell their own stories, and each have their own secrets to be found if the player is willing. Enemies found in each level are fitting for their setting. You'll find royal guards in Anor Londo, you find the ghosts in New Londo, you'll even find evil trees in the Dark Root Garden, and these make the levels more seamless and immersive. You will never have to ask yourself why a certain type of enemy is located where they are, because they are each placed perfectly in order to fit in. Each level is perfectly crafted so that you know exactly what to expect, but the levels are also all connected to one another, which shows emphasis that this world is bigger than you or I. Whether or not you decide to continue the game, Lordran will go on. Someone will eventually ring the bells, and the world will find its champions. The levels in Dark Souls propel the narrative that you are involved in something bigger than yourself, and that while you are the main character, you are just a part of this world, and it does not revolve around you. It's quite possible that the narrative of Dark Souls would not be as easily achievable in any other medium. The fact that you can control the chosen undead's every move helps to establish a certain connection, which is arguably more intimate and personal than the lead character in a book or a film. The chosen undead is you, and this bond with the character, as well as the game's overall narrative, is established in ways other than the game's cutscenes. There is no cutscene of the player being overwhelmed during their first trip to a new level. There's no cutscene for the rewarding feeling that comes from defeating the boss that has killed you over 300 frickin' times. These feelings are instead established through the gameplay and the environmental storytelling. It's easy to get lost in the beautiful world of Lordran, and players should be encouraged to do so long as they don't lose sight of what they're doing. Whatever you do, please don't go hollow.